Well, hello, good evening, everyone. David Neff here, and I'm with Immutable Destiny, and we are going to be wrapping up the journey into the Dr. Robert Carter speech, Genetics According to Jesus. It has been quite a while. It's been about a week, and it's just all kinds of bad. It's just your typical Dr. Carter stuff. I think we're started in the middle of this, so I'm just going to back up just right here, where he starts talking about genetics and um, what appears to be a blatant plagiarism from Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson. So, with that, let's get started.
Let's go back to this again. You have a better understanding of what you're looking at now? You see all these groups. Look at this. Long population explosion. Oh, this is the most common Y chromosome in Africa today. These people are not Africans. This is Greek, Palestinian, Bulgarian. These people are not African. Genghis Khan belonged to this group. These are Asians. These are, wait a minute, probably 95% of Africans are in this group, but they branch off from non-Africans. You know what that means? These are the Bushmen and the pygmies in the rainforest. These people who dominate Africa today arose outside of Africa recently. If this is time, this is recent. Oh, this is China, Japan, and Korea. You see how this just giant fan shape? You know what that's an indication of?
And I know we spoke about this a little bit in the last stage, but this is an unrooted tree, not a rooted tree. That is very problematic. We spoke about it more in depth last week at our in part 2, and Dr. Deanna, aka Creation Myths, has done a really good video on rooted versus unrooted tree. I'm not gonna spend too much time going over that because you can just go to Dr. Dan's channel and watch his video on the unrooted tree, and you can see what the problem is. Basically, in a nutshell, the problem is that because this is unrooted, you can basically root this anywhere you want. And spoiler alert, when you actually do start making a rooted tree based upon this unrooted tree, it shows the exact opposite of what creationists want to show.
Yep.
Now, I might be blind, but it looks like that this is the exact same tree that Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson uses.
Yeah, it looks pretty freaking similar.
Yep. Just to compare and contrast, here's the one from Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson. This is Jeanson's tree. We can see that right here. His mitochondrial tree right over here. Once again, it's an unrooted tree, which is very problematic for reasons that we touched on in part 2 and Dr. Dan touched on in his video. So that's Jeanson's tree. And let's compare that to Dr. Carter's tree. It's pretty darn close.
Yeah, they look pretty freaking similar. It's possible he recreated it on his own, but yeah, I'm a little unconvinced.
Yeah, and according to Dr. Carter, I think that this is supposed to be the Y DNA. So according to Dr. Carter, if I'm understanding it, this unrooted tree represents the Y DNA, and the Jeanson is using the MT DNA. That's their claim, but the point remains that it looks very close towards each other. It's very similar to each other, and even if I can see that there are two different trees, the problem that this is an unrooted tree remains.
Yeah, you gotta wonder also if they bothered going through the process of, I don't know, hiring an independent geneticist to confirm whether or not they get similar results or the same type of tree happening here. But I don't think that would really work too well for them because, well, other people aren't usually creationists, so that might pose an issue.
Yeah, and there is a reason why young Earth creationists choose to publish in their own in-house journals, and not peer-reviewed journals like Nature or Science, where their actual work, if they were actually publishing in journals like Nature, their works would be heavily criticized by other scientists. And
well, they wouldn't be accepted at all.
They would not. They wouldn't. they would be laughed at, and the journal would contact their the university where they got their PhD from and say, "Hey, this guy needs to have their PhD revoked."
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is too, like at least the creationist literature I've read, it's full of just like, oh, evolutionists are horrible, evolutionists eat babies, like just all sorts of wild stuff that goes, that goes
Right.
on there, and it's like that's really not the topic of interest, like when you're discussing academic research. But I don't know.
Right. All right. So let's continue.
And growing for a long period of time. And so we have the founding of China, and they've just been growing like crazy. This is me. And most of the men in this room, if you're European, you belong to this group. It's the most common lineage in Europe today. But look, they go back to a common ancestor recently. These people are in India, Pakistan, recent. This is Native Americans. Native Americans, recent. So this is like founding of Native America and people spreading out. Oh boy, it looks like Europe was settled pretty late in history. In ancient DNA, Europeans belong to these groups. Modern DNA, Europeans belong to these groups because the Europeans invaded and killed off all these people that lived there first. This is cool. There's history in this. Lots of history. In fact, biblically, if you look at where the sons of Ham settled, all these men are in that region.
I'm going to fast forward a couple minutes just because I know I think we did this.
Yeah, I think we covered that already.
Yeah, I'm just going to skip ahead. I'm just going to skip ahead just because I know we spoke about this.
Because the sons of Ham lived everywhere. Japheth, and that circle will be Ham. Is that true?
Well, once again, that looks awfully close to the Dr. Nathaniel Jensen's unrooted tree. And again, the point remains that it's an unrooted tree, and that is deeply problematic.
True? I don't know. But it's fun to speculate. I could be very wrong.
So he doesn't know and is speculating, but he's preaching it as if it was a fact.
It's also fun to speculate that like there's leprechauns, like with a pot of gold, like at the end of a rainbow. Do I get to declare that as true now because that's my favorite story?
Right?
It's fun to speculate, therefore it's true. What?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that's the way that worked.
Right, exactly.
If that's the case, I can believe all sorts of things that are not factual.
Right, exactly. Don't assert things as facts unless you know and can prove that they are facts.
Wrong. But this is a biblical pattern. There's three major groups. They all go back to, look at this. This is more than half of the men in the world. They go back to one common ancestor. One man in history is the ancestor to about half the men in the world. Right here, this is a little complicated, but this group goes back to one man. This group goes back to a man only one mutation removed. So these guys could have been brothers. All these people go back to that guy there, or maybe this guy here. Is that interesting? All right, let me show you the mitochondrial family tree. And the Bible says we all came from one woman. What do you see?
So that is almost certainly the Dr. Nathaniel Jensen's tree right there. Once again, it's an unrooted tree. So there's a lot of problems just by the fact that it's an unrooted tree. Like, there is a reason that Dr. Nathaniel Jensen and Dr. Carter are not showing you a rooted tree. And let me see if I can pull this up from Eva Grad, because he has the definitive rebuttal to Dr. Nathaniel Jensen's work replacing Darwin. He actually shows exactly what the problem is if this were a rooted tree. So an unrooted tree like this, the three supposed clades that he's showing, I'm going to stop sharing, share the screen, Chrome tab. Here we go. From Eva Grad. Three major haplogroups have long been recognized by mainstream science, but there's a problem. I reproduced Jensen's human mitochondrial DNA analysis and the resulting phylogenetic tree, matching Jensen's as shown below to a lay reader. It certainly does appear to result in three nodes. However, anyone familiar with how to read phylogenetic trees will immediately know that you can't choose three nodes in an unrooted radical tree like this and decide that these represent three contemporary individuals that gave rise to three clades. The three nodes are directly connected to each other by lines, so there must necessarily be some kind of ancestor-descendant relationship among these individuals. And here we go. What do you know? This is why Dr. Carter and Dr. Jensen do not show you a rooted tree. A and B are identical phylogeny, only differing in how they present it. radical trees with no clear roots, direct production of genes in the tree, and the rectangular phylogenetic tree rooted in the midpoint. The red arrows point to each of the three nodes Jeanson proposes as the wives of Noah's sons. Black branches represent the L haplogroup, representing the M haplogroup. Blue represents the N haplogroup, and green represents the R haplogroup. So I reproduced Jeanson's phylogeny, collecting the same set of 369 human mtDNA sequences, aligning them, removing the positions containing gaps using the draw tree function and that program, and we can estimate that. And 8 to 100 generations. Basically, Jeanson's result in reasoning indicates that the two unknown sons were married to the great 94 times more great daughters of the wife of Noah's remaining sons. So, yeah, that is from Evergrad. It's the absolute definitive rebuttal to replace Darwin. I'm going to put a link to this in the sideboard chat, and I'll put a link to that in the description as well. This is the definitive rebuttal to Jeanson's work, and this is why Dr. Carter is not showing you a rooted tree. Because if he showed you a rooted tree, it will not show what Dr. Carter wants you to show. It's really that simple.
Yeah, I'm not qualified enough to to really understand the whole phylogenetic tree stuff, but I take it that other people understand this better than I do and have done their homework on it.
Yeah, and Dr. Dan did a really good video on this as well. I'm going to put a link to his video on unrooted tree in the description as well. So if you're not subscribed to Dr. Dan, go do that now. Let's continue.
Groups going back to common ancestors. By the way, this is Europe again, recent. Over here is China and Asia. There's a lot of Asian people. These are African peoples. But look, they go back to these group founders who are recent people, and all these people come from them. Have you ever heard of the idea called a molecular clock? It's an evolutionary concept that when you look at the differences between two different species, you can tell how long ago they separated.
Oh boy, get ready for Dr. Jeanson. This is going to be good.
Yep.
This is how different they are. So you can count out the mutations, and if you know how fast mutations happen, they have 1,000 mutations, one mutation per year, they'd be separated for 1,000 years. Called a molecular clock. It doesn't work. I can prove it. Look at the people here. These are Europeans. Here's their common ancestor. That person has 1/2 the number of mutations as this person.
So he basically said that the molecular clock doesn't work, which it does. I'm not going to really go in depth of why it works or how it works. You can see my collaboration with Dr. Dan on our response to Dr. Jeanson. But basically what he's admitting, if we were to say that, it's basically he's admitting that Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson is wrong. By saying that the molecular clock is wrong, he's effectively saying that Dr. Jeanson's work is invalid. Just pointing that out there.
Yeah, because it means that the mutations, the rate at which the mutations could occur, would not be constant.
Right.
And that means that, you could have, a shorter or longer number of generation times under their model than what they're predicting. If I'm understanding it right.
From the same ancestor. This person's way out here and his cousin's down here. So when I look at these African groups, this is the Bushmen and the Pygmies, the small people groups in Africa. Not the majority of Africans, the little groups. But just because these guys are so far out here, I don't know that that's because they're older. Maybe they just, like this, have more mutations than the other groups. Once you get rid of the molecular clock, you can put mitochondrial Eve anywhere on the tree. So I'm very happy placing her somewhere in this region and not out here with the...
But again, you have to substantiate that. If you want to say you want to put her in the middle, okay, well, substantiate that. Why put it in the middle and not in the far right or the far left?
And his explanation was I don't think she should be, so she's not going to be.
Right, exactly.
Was that the brunt of what I just heard?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what you just heard. I'm not an expert on mitochondrial DNA, but if you're interested, Dr. Dan and I did a video response to Jeanson, and we also and Dr. Dan also has a couple videos on the mitochondrial mysteries and common ancestor. Definitely get that and watch. I'm going to put the links to that in the description as well.
Evolutionists would place her. So the Bible claims there's one male ancestor and one female ancestor. That is not a requirement of evolutionary history, but the evolutionists discovered it. They call her mitochondrial Eve. They call him Y chromosome Adam.
Boy, where to begin? So I think we touched up on this last video as well, but just a reminder that the most recent common ancestor is not the origin of humanity. It's just that the most recent common ancestor, and the most recent common ancestor is not the only human alive at that time, and also the most recent common ancestor depends on what generation you are in. So as you go forward in time, the most recent common ancestor necessarily moves forward in time as well. So calling them mitochondrial Adam and mitochondrial Eve does not mean that this is the origins of humanity.
Yep.
Biblically ignorant. It's Y chromosome Noah evolutionist. Come on, read your Bible. All men in the world go back to Noah. Adam's Y chromosome has been lost. It also happens to be true that challenges the idea that we have a common ancestor with chimpanzees. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That was weird. What just happened? I didn't do anything. All right, so what? Technology. All right, let me ask another question. How many people in the world today? 7 billion. Can we get 7 billion people from 6 people 4,500 years ago?
The answer to that question
The fact
is no.
you think you can is impressive.
Right, exactly. You would have to have supersonic growth after a couple of decades after the flood in order to get the amount of people needed to build the Great Pyramids and build the Tower of Babel, which were only less than 500 years after the flood. Just to remind you all, somehow this was all during a catastrophic ice age as well. It just does not work. You just can't get all that variation in just a couple of decades, which is exactly what the flood model requires. And not just for humans, but for all animal species as well.
Noah's flood? Say no? Yes? Oh, difference of opinion. Actually, the answer is it's trivial. Piece of cake. All you have to do is double the population every 150 years.
And nobody in that population dies, and everybody in that population also happens to reproduce. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, by the way, these numbers are absolute bonkers. And if you actually go through Ancients and Genesis, they kind of contradict themselves on what the population growth rate is. But let's just take this to the logical conclusion. Okay, so you have a population of 8. T equals 0 is 8. We know that the Tower of Babel was supposedly 102 years after the flood. Well, if you're doubling the population every 150 years, there will be less than 16 people at the time of Babel, and probably less than 20,000 people at the time of Abraham. It just doesn't work. These numbers are absolute bonkers.
And going like forward in the future, right? Here's the thing, right? If those numbers are in fact true, right? We should expect there to be what, like 16 billion people on the planet after, like what, 14 billion or something like that people in 150 years.
Well, basically what they do is they take the current population, and this is our conclusion. This is the answer. So, how do we work backwards in order to get this number?
Oh yeah.
So basically they say, here's the conclusion. Okay. We already know the answer, so let's just work our way backwards and say, okay, how many doublings would that be from 4,300 years ago, or so to speak? This is into the Genesis. This is their top scholarship.
This is the big brain creationist research there, people.
Right, exactly. Less than 16 people at the time of Babel. Just let that sink in. If these numbers were in fact correct. And he's given no reason to say whether or not these are correct. Why are we assuming a population doubling of every 150 years? What does he base this on?
I got 4 kids. My wife and I have already doubled our population. Human populations double much, much faster than once every 150 years. But if you just double once every 150 years, or 150 years after the flood, now there's 12 people. 300 years after the flood, there's 24 people. 450 years after the flood, now there's 48 people. Doesn't sound like.
So that'll mean around the time of Abraham, there will be about 48 people. Just pointing that out there. Do the timeline.
Not exactly a huge population.
Yeah. So Dr. Carter, your numbers are way off. Way off.
We're getting very fast. You get 7 billion people today if you do that. So my answer is The fact that there's 7 billion people, we actually kill most of the people off to keep it down this much. So most people ever born died of warfare, starvation, or disease. Yuck.
That throws off your point.
Yeah.
Do you not understand what exponential growth is?
Right. Like, I am really, my mind is actually boggled that he's actually saying these words.
If tons of people die due to famine and warfare and disease,
that means that means the people early at the time of the flood are going to have to be pumping out even more babies just to keep up with the population that is dying.
Yeah, and it also means that everybody in your population doesn't reproduce.
Right. These numbers are absolute bonkers.
It's just amazing.
Population in check. This also raises another interesting question. If there's like 1 million Homo erectuses on the earth for about 1 million years, and their average generation time is about 20 years, that's 1 million dead bodies every 20 years. There'd be billions of Homo erectuses in that time frame. We can fit all the Homo erectus fossils we ever found in the trunk of a car. Where are the billions of dead bodies?
Why do you think? Oh God, you can't be this stupid.
Why would you expect
fossilization is a very rare event? Why would we expect like billions of?
I guess the answer can be turned back on him. If these are fossils that are less than 4,300 years old, why don't we find more of them, and why don't we have their genetics?
I mean, if that's actually properly, that's proper in how he's assessing the situation, we should find like human skeletons like on every square foot of the planet.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, why are there fossils of humans for that matter, right? Because our prediction is, there's a certain point in time like where mineralization kind of takes over and like replaces the bone part of skeletons to make fossils. But we shouldn't observe fossils at all if creationism is true, especially young Earth creationism.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not adding up.
It's as if they never existed. Talk about Neanderthal for a second. When I say Neanderthal, what do you think? Brutish, stupid? Remember the picture of the guy carrying a club and dragging the woman by the hair? Remember those images that have been placed in our mind? The Geico commercials? This is a charcoal drawing of what Neanderthal supposedly looked like from the 1800s. He's distorted.
So yeah, he's correct in this, that the popular image of Neanderthals being dumb and brutish is in fact wrong. Okay, I can agree.
The media distorts things. Oh my, I would never have guessed. Thank you for informing me of things that everybody can tell.
You made his face look more to make him look more like a monkey. This is the New York Museum of Natural History. I don't know if it's still there or not. Why are both of his knees bent? They're trying to hide the fact from the hips down he looks just like you. He would have walked exactly like we walk. But they're trying to make him look more like a monkey by bending his knees. Yeah, their hips, their ribs flared out. They had a bell-shaped rib cage. We have a barrel-shaped rib cage. Their skulls are a little different. See, our forehead goes up and their forehead goes back. We have a chin. They had no chin. But their brains are bigger than ours. Ooh. Anthropologists now are saying Neanderthal men painted in caves, tracked the stars, made musical instruments, buried their dead with beads with their heads pointing towards the sun.
That is very true. It might be, because they're the closest relative to humans to ever live. And yeah, they didn't have any chin. And we have the genetics of Neanderthals, and we see that they are radically different from humans. But not only that, there is, of course, Neanderthal DNA in humans, but it's interesting that there is no human DNA in Neanderthals, which means that mating was a one-way street, and obviously it shows that mating between the two species were quite difficult.
Yep.
Here. Answers atheism. Apparently, only 3 squirrels live in the river valley behind my house. I never have found a squirrel fossil, so they must all be immortal.
I guess so. That would explain things.
Yeah, that's pretty much what Dr. Carter's arguing.
Sunrise. They scoured a landscape of rare minerals and took them home and ground them up into powders for makeup. That they Everyone else, everywhere we find Neanderthal remains, we find tar balls. Well, it's from birch bark. Turns out, and we just figured out last year how they did it. If you take birch bark and you make a cone out of it, and you set it in a fire, oh yeah, Neanderthals had fire. You set it in a fire, just the right temperature. It'll boil off it smells really good at first, and then it'll boil down all the oils, and it'll make tar. And while everyone else in the world was tying their spear points to their spear shafts, Neanderthal was using super glue made of birch bark to glue their spear points on. I thought these are primitive. These guys were not in Africa. They don't live in Africa. They live in Europe and Asia. They weren't part of that Homo sapiens event where we went from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens. They weren't part of that. They're not human.
I'm really dumbfounded right now. Did he really just say what I think he just said?
Probably.
Like, my God. Like, I don't even know where to begin. It's just so mind-bogglingly stupid.
This is why chemists don't talk about anthropology.
Yep. Well, he's a marine biologist, so...
oh, well, there we go. Not even a chemist.
Yeah. But still, not an anthropologist. So, stick to marine biology.
So why do modern depictions of Neanderthal look so human?
Because they were our closest relatives. And technically speaking, you could argue that they are in fact human because they are in the genus Homo. However, the point remains when you do a phylogenetic analysis between humans and Neanderthals, and it's clear that Neanderthals represent a distinct lineage of hominin. So humans and Neanderthals are not the same species. That is not up for debate. But you could try and argue that, okay, they're humans because they're the genus Homo. But I digress. And again, they're our closest relatives. We would expect us to have the most shared characteristics in common just because of the fact that they're our closest relative.
This is a picture from a museum. You ever see one of those shows? They take a skull and they put clay on it and they paint it. Oh, what does the person really look like? I mean, I love that stuff. That's what happens when you do a Neanderthal child. Does he look like half a monkey to you? He looks like a little boy. Why does he have green eyes and freckles? Because of DNA. Because we can now pull DNA out of Neanderthals. And when they looked at the skin color genes, they said, oh my, a lot of Neanderthals had light complexions. And they said, you know.
Well, that's because they lived in Europe, so no shit.
You know what? Europeans probably got their light complexion from Neanderthals. And now that we can sequence Neanderthal genomes, multiple Neanderthal genomes have been sequenced. They are Homo sapiens.
No, they aren't.
Human beings. 60% of the Neanderthal genome is in this audience. They're the first people that lived in Europe. Call them a racial group if you like. And then they were obliterated or overwhelmed by a later people group who moved in with farms. The people who had farms have more children. But they didn't kill them all off. No, they married them. All of you have Neanderthal DNA. Unless you have 100% African ancestry, you have Neanderthal DNA. Because they're people. Human beings who lived on the earth after Noah's flood.
No, that's not what the evidence shows at all. Once again, do a phylogenetic analysis of the human Neanderthal DNA, you see that they are two separate lineages. And there is no human DNA in Neanderthals, which is quite weird if, Neanderthals were actually Homo sapien.
It's always interesting when people outside of their field talk about fields that are outside their fields.
Yeah, exactly. And
because you get things like this.
Right, and you get things like this, and it's quite embarrassing, honestly.
Modern genetics is finally catching up to the Bible.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there we go. Because the Bible predicted this all this time. Jesus secretly figured out Mendelian genetics, but just, he was just so much of an asshole to not, share that knowledge with the rest of the world when he existed. Yeah, great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Right.
That's believable.
I don't think we're about to get into Darwin racist bad, Darwin bad, Evo bad. That looks like what we're about to get into.
Explain all big word. Phenotype is the way people look. Genotype is genes, phenotype is the way you look. The genes that explain the differences between the way people look between populations only represent a tiny part of our genome, confirming once again the concept of race from a genetic standpoint has been abolished. That man in that statement just erased 150 years of Darwinian speculations about race. Everything Darwin wrote about race was wrong, and right now very politically incorrect.
Do you recognize that words are polysemic? and
Right.
that like the way Darwin was using word was not in the way
Right.
we classify race, like when people talk about racism.
Right,
That
exactly. And so the way that Darwin used race um, is kind of archaic, because you also had in Darwin's work and in other works at the time, like racist of cabbage. So that is the type of term that is being employed when he is speaking of races. So again, is it true that Darwin was a racist? Yes, but he was pretty progressive for his time. And many of the far right Christians were also very deeply racist. In fact, yesterday I had, I think it was yesterday or the day before, I actually sat down with a scholar who, and we went through the history of the evangelical right. And guess what? It's rooted in racism.
there's a shocker.
But under Christ, there are no racial divisions. Look at Colossians 3:11. Here there's not Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave free, but Christ is all and in all. The Bible gives racial reconciliation right there. That was Isaiah 50. A redeemer will come to Zion to those in Jacob who turn from transgression, declares the Lord. That redeemer. That's the kinsman redeemer. That's like in Ruth. Boaz is the kinsman redeemer. He stepped in, he paid Ruth's debt, and then married her daughter-in-law. Okay, that's kind of a nice little bargain he got there. But the idea in Old Testament law is that you can have a person come in and pay a debt for you. Well, Jesus Christ is that person for us. But wait a minute, I'm not Jewish. How can Jesus Christ pay my debt? Well, I'm related to him through Adam. 1 Corinthians 15:45. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. With the result that now, Ephesians 2, now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off, that's me, have been brought near by the blood of Christ, for he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. My pagan, Celtic, and Northern European ancestors knew nothing about Jesus Christ. They knew nothing about Abraham. They knew nothing about the God of the Bible. They were as wicked and vile as you can imagine. Their history is disgusting. And yet my Creator sought me out and grafted me in to a bush I don't belong to. And the reason that can be true is because Jesus Christ, the God who became man, was a descendant of Adam. And he took the penalty that Adam and all of his descendants deserved. I'm a descendant of Adam, and you're descendants of Adam. This is why in Christianity, there are no racial boundaries. This is why, who's the first non-Jewish person to receive the gospel? I believe, maybe Cornelius, I believe it was the Ethiopian eunuch who was on his way back to Ethiopia. Let's say it this way. Where's the place not close to Israel that the gospel went? And the answer is Africa. Hundreds of years before it arrived in Europe, it was already in Africa. Do you realize when you talk about Africa today, you can't talk about Africa without mentioning Christianity? And the reason Christianity is so popular in Africa is because so many white missionaries from Germany and England went to Africa in the 1800s and they died like flies. There's one story of a missionary arrives in Central Africa. The first thing they do is they bring him to the graveyard. They say, you're going to be there. He goes, I died when I got on the boat. He died anyway.
So, yeah. What?
But he went there to spread the gospel. The history of Christianity is one of breaking down these barriers. We need to tell this to people, especially in America today, when things seem to be getting worse. And they shouldn't be getting worse, because in Christianity, we have an answer. I just did hop, skip, and jump over a lot of different topics. Some of my favorite topics, I did not fill in nearly as much as I wanted to. So if you're interested in this and you want to know somewhere to go, I got stuff for you. There's a pile of books and DVDs out there. We have our website, creation.com. I'm writing a book right now on genetics and Adam and Eve. It's going to be fun. It's fun to write it.
So it looks like he's at the end of his speech and he's just spouting off a bunch of information.
Yeah, it looks like we're going through the entirety of the creation lineup for topics they don't understand and deliberately want to misrepresent.
Right, and it looks like he actually did that earlier in the speech. Pro tip, just save all your infomercials for the very end.
Remember, we were supposed to understand how Jesus understood these things and how Jesus understood genetics and all the fun stuff, and we never got there. Oh.
Right, we never understood.
Oh, that's a shame. I was hoping the Bible would share some secret knowledge with me about how Jesus or Abraham or somebody would have discovered genetics and just completely overthrow Darwin and all this fun stuff. But alas, that didn't happen.
No, it didn't.
Darn.
And we just see how Dr. Carter is just blatantly misrepresenting his stuff yet again. So that is a wrap. This is the final part of part 3. A link to part 1 and 2 is in the description down below. Any final thought on this monstrosity?
No, it's just, am I surprised? No. Am I disappointed? Kind of. I was expecting him to go a little more crazy than he did.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It happens.
Yeah, so I guess all what remains is liar or incompetent, and I generally do not know which. Um, Leave a comment down below and let me know which one you think it is. Um, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification down below. I have a couple things coming up. On Monday, I'm having a chat with Leo Felius on cosmology, so stay tuned for that. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification down below so you can be notified when I go live. I try to do a live show at least once a week or every other week. This past few weeks, it's been a couple times a week. So if you like what I do, feel free to become a Patreon, patreon.com/David Neff, or make a one-time donation in the description down below. And yeah, Dr. Carter was arguing for Young Earth. That is Dr. Carter that we were responding to as Young Earth creationist. Just want to say here, Darwin was a Christian. Yeah, I believe that is the case. He was originally studying the Anglican priest, and he certainly was far less racist than most people of his time. But keep in mind, if you want to blame Darwin for racism, then who are you blaming for when you see Bob Jones University and other far-right evangelicals created segregation academies to keep African Americans out of their churches and schools? Whose fault is that? It seems like people are inclined to latch on to anything to justify their views, no matter how abhorrent it is. They're going to misuse scripture, or they're going to misuse science to justify their views. So,
Yeah, I think that's actually like one of the more dangerous parts of creationism. It's like, as much as they ignore science and stuff like that, they also ignore a lot of history to make their point as well. Like, they pretend things like, oh, Darwin was like the first racist. Really?
wrong.
Is that the claim we want to make? Because do we really want to go back to like medieval Europe and see some of the racist activity going on there? Like,
Yeah,
are
exactly.
you sure you want to make that point?
Right, and look at racism in your church, the vile white supremacy permeating in your pews. It's there. It's disgusting. It's vile.
Oh yeah.
And again, go on my channel and watch the lecture, the interview that I did with Dr. Balmer on this subject about race and the religious rights. The entire religious right movement was founded on racism and support of desegregation. That is a fact, and you can't blame Darwin for that.
Nope. Unfortunately not.
Yeah. Well, with that, have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It is a pleasure to be with you. Have a wonderful evening, and I will see you on Monday.